What happens when one of Hollywood's most respected actors goes head-to-head with a talk show host who believes he can push anyone around? What you're about to hear might shake you to your core. Before we get into it, be sure to hit that subscribe button and leave a comment, because this story will make you rethink everything you thought you knew about late-night television. It was a sweltering Tuesday evening under the studio lights when Michael B. Jordan took his seat opposite Jimmy Kimmel. The audience buzzed with excitement, expecting a typical promotional chat about Michael's new film. Instead, they witnessed a gripping lesson in how fast things can unravel when strong personalities clash. Jimmy started with his usual smirk, the one his fans adore. But tonight, it felt different, more pointed. I have to ask, you've probably seen the rumors about your personal life all over social media. Michael shifted slightly in his seat, his smile composed but his gaze sharpening. Jimmy, I'm here to talk about the film. That's what we agreed to. Oh, come on, Jimmy said with a chuckle that lacked warmth. The audience wants answers. Don't they deserve the truth? You're on my show, in my chair. The least you can do is be honest with the people who support your career. The energy in the room shifted. Even the enthusiastic crowd could sense the tension. Michael's jaw tightened, barely noticeable. With all due respect, Jimmy, there's a line between being honest and feeding into gossip. I've always been clear about my work, my craft, and what matters to me professionally. But that's exactly where you're wrong, Jimmy said, leaning in with a tone that made some in the audience visibly uncomfortable. When you sit in that chair, everything's fair game, your personal life, politics, relationships, family. That's how this works. You don't get to control the story. Michael, known in Hollywood for keeping his cool through intense media pressure and grueling roles, was visibly affected by Jimmy's tone. The words "that's how this works" struck a nerve. Actually, Jimmy, that's how you think it works. There's a big difference. Oh really? Jimmy replied, his voice laced with sarcasm. Go ahead, enlighten me. You're the guest here, after all. I've been doing this for decades. I think I know how my own show runs. Silence fell over the audience. This was no longer the light-hearted back and forth they expected. It was something raw and uncomfortable. Michael paused, gathering himself, though frustration was clear behind his eyes. Jimmy, I've done dozens of interviews. I've spoken with everyone from Oprah to Howard Stern. Every one of them understood there's a boundary between entertainment and exploitation. They saw me as a person before a public figure. Exploitation? Jimmy scoffed, but the laughter sounded hollow. That's rich, coming from a guy who's made millions playing the same tough guy in every movie for the last 5 years. You want to talk about exploitation? How about exploiting your fans by giving them the same performance over and over? The attack came out of nowhere, so abrupt and needlessly harsh that several people in the audience audibly gasped. Michael's publicist, seated in the front row, looked like she might have a heart attack. But Michael didn't move. He went completely still, his expression shifting from mere frustration to visible hurt, and then to something far more dangerous. Excuse me, Michael said, his voice low and controlled. Anyone who knew him would have recognized it as a warning. Did you just question my integrity as an actor? I'm questioning a lot of things, Michael. Your acting. Your authenticity. Your entire, carefully crafted image. Let's be real, you're sitting across from me pretending to be some noble artist when everyone knows you're just another Hollywood pretty boy who stumbled into a few lucky roles. The words lingered in the air like poison. Michael's hands, previously relaxed on the armrests, slowly curled into fists. The camera operators, sensing the shift in tension, began zooming in closer to catch every flicker of emotion on his face. Jimmy, Michael said, voice steady but edged like a blade, you'd better be very careful about what you say next. Because right now, you're not just insulting me. You're insulting every actor who's spent their life refining their craft. You're disrespecting every person who's fought to make something of themselves. Oh, spare me the sanctimonious speech, Jimmy said, waving him off. You think a few awards and a pretty face make you untouchable? This is late-night television, Michael. If you can't take the heat, maybe you should stick to superhero movies, where everything's scripted and safe. That's when something snapped. Michael's media training, his professionalism, and his carefully polished image, all of it shattered like glass under pressure. He leaned forward, his voice lowering to a whisper laced with menace. Jimmy, let me make one thing clear. I didn't luck into anything. Every role I've landed, every award I've earned, every dollar in my bank account, I got all of it through blood, sweat, and the kind of dedication that would crush most people. I've worked with directors who've forgotten more about filmmaking than you'll ever learn about comedy. Is that supposed to scare me? Jimmy shot back, though for the first time, there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. You think acting tough works on me? This is my house, Michael. My show. My rules. Your house. Michael laughed, cold, humorless. Jimmy, you're not even the funniest person in this building. You're a middle-aged man whose biggest accomplishment is mocking people more talented, more successful, and frankly, more relevant than you'll ever be. The room was dead silent now. Some people had their hands over their mouths in disbelief. This wasn't a talk show anymore. It felt like a public execution, and no one knew who would come out of it alive. You want to bring up my personal life? Michael continued, his voice building force like a train at full speed. Let's talk about yours. Let's talk about how you've made a whole career out of playing it safe. Being the vanilla choice, the one networks pick when they want someone who won't stir the pot or challenge the audience. Jimmy's face was turning red, his usual smugness disappearing under Michael's verbal assault. You don't know what you're talking about. Don't I? Michael replied. I know exactly what I'm talking about. You're intimidated by people like me because we're everything you're too afraid to become. We take risks. We break boundaries. We make art that means something. You deliver jokes written by people who are funnier than you and interview guests who are more interesting than you. The camera caught Jimmy's hands trembling slightly as he reached for his coffee mug, trying to steady himself and reclaim control of his show. But Michael wasn't finished. You know what, Michael, Jimmy said, his voice cracking as he set the mug down with more force than needed. I think you've been reading too many of your own press releases. You're acting like some kind of artistic genius, but the truth is, you're just another actor with good looks and a decent agent. Michael tilted his head, observing Jimmy like he was something fascinating. Jimmy, are you having a breakdown right now? Because honestly, this is hard to watch. Your audience deserves better than whatever this is. My audience loves me, Jimmy snapped, but his eyes flicked nervously toward the silent crowd. They've been laughing at my jokes for years. Have they, though? Michael replied, his words hanging in the air. Because I'm looking at them, and they don't seem to be enjoying themselves. They look embarrassed for you. Behind the cameras, Jimmy's producer was wildly signaling for a commercial break, but Jimmy was too wrapped up in the moment to notice. His desperation was showing more with each second, and Michael picked up on it like a predator sensing weakness. You want to know what's really going on? You're upset that people like me exist. While you're up here every night making safe jokes about politicians and celebrities, others are creating real art, telling important stories, making an actual difference. Making a difference? Jimmy scoffed bitterly, all traces of humor gone. You make movies, Michael. You play pretend. Don't act like you're saving lives. And you tell jokes, Michael shot back without hesitation. At least my work inspires people. At least when someone watches one of my films, they might see something in themselves they hadn't before. Your show? It's just filler to help people fall asleep. The audience began to stir, murmurs spreading, with some even nodding in agreement with Michael. Jimmy saw this and it only fueled his panic and recklessness. You really think you're above everyone, don't you? He said, voice rising and composure slipping. You walk around Hollywood like a king, like everyone should worship the almighty Michael B. Jordan. Jimmy, I never claimed to be better than anyone, Michael replied calmly. But I am better than this. Better than sitting here while you try to drag me down just to feel important. Better than pretending this is entertainment when it's just sad. Michael began to stand, but Jimmy wasn't ready to let it end. In a moment he'd regret forever, he reached out and grabbed Michael's arm. "Sit down. We're not finished." The touch was electric, like sparking a live wire. Michael looked down at Jimmy's hand, then up at his face, his expression cold enough to freeze lava. When he finally spoke, his voice was so quiet the audience had to lean in to hear. "Jimmy, take your hand off me. Right now." Something in his tone finally broke through the fog of Jimmy's rage. He released his grip instantly, but the damage was already done. The boundary had been crossed, and everyone in the studio felt it. "Did you just put your hands on me?" Michael asked, his voice still calm but dangerously quiet. "Did you actually try to physically force me to stay in that chair just so you could keep humiliating me on national television?" Jimmy's face turned pale as the weight of his actions hit him. "Michael, I didn't mean to. You were just what, Jimmy? Just so desperate to stay in control that you forgot about basic human decency? That you forgot I'm a human being, not your property?" A heavy silence fell across the room. Even the camera operators had stopped in place, stunned by the emotion unfolding before them. Michael rose slowly to his feet, towering over Jimmy, who now looked small and feeble in his chair. "You know what's really disappointing, Jimmy? I came here tonight excited to talk about my work. I came with respect for you and your show. I thought we'd have a meaningful conversation about art, about creativity, about things that matter." When Jimmy tried to speak, Michael raised a hand, cutting him off. "No, Jimmy. You had your chance. Now it's mine. You want to know what I think of you? I think you're a coward. You're so terrified of becoming irrelevant that you'll tear down anyone who reminds you how limited your world really is." "Michael, please," Jimmy whispered, barely audible. Can we start over?" Michael let out a sharp, bitter laugh. "Start over? Jimmy, there's no starting over from this. Tonight, you revealed who you truly are. You showed everyone that when the pressure's on, you're just a bully with a microphone." The audience was glued to the scene, witnessing one of the most painfully real moments ever aired on live television. Some held up phones to record, others simply watched, stunned. The atmosphere was charged, tense and electric. "I've been in this industry for over a decade," Michael said, his voice growing stronger with each word. "I've worked with brilliant directors, talented actors, the most creative minds in Hollywood. And in all that time, I've never met anyone as blatantly unprofessional as you're being right now." Jimmy's hands visibly trembled as he reached for his water. "Michael, maybe we should take a break, give everyone a moment to calm down." Michael raised his eyebrows. "Calm down? Jimmy, I'm completely calm. Probably the calmest person in this entire building. You're the one unraveling. You've lost control of your own show." The truth in those words hit Jimmy like a punch. He glanced around for support, from the band, the writers, anyone, but all he saw were blank stares filled with pity and quiet judgment. "You want to know what's really going on here?" Michael asked, now facing the camera. "This man invited me under false pretenses. He told my team we'd talk about my new film, my creative work, my upcoming projects. But instead, he blindsided me with personal jabs and tabloid nonsense." Jimmy tried to interrupt, but Michael pressed on. "And when I refused to play his little game, when I chose to keep my dignity and professionalism, he got angry. So angry that he actually put his hands on me, trying to force me to take part in my own humiliation." The weight of Michael's words blanketed the studio, heavy and unshakable. It became clear to everyone, this wasn't just a chaotic interview. They were witnessing a moment that could end a career. "Jimmy, I want you to look at me," Michael said, his voice gentle yet firm. "Really look. Do you see what you've turned into? Do you realize that in 5 minutes, you've destroyed everything you spent years building?" Jimmy lifted his eyes, red and glassy. For a fleeting second, it seemed like he might apologize, might attempt to pull something from the ruins. But instead, he made the worst choice of his career. Rather than apologizing, Jimmy's expression contorted, ugly and strained. He turned to the audience with a forced grin that barely masked his panic. You know what, folks? I think we're finally seeing the real Michael B. Jordan tonight. This is what happens when these Hollywood divas don't get their way, they act like spoiled kids. The audience gasped aloud. Even Jimmy's most devoted supporters were stunned. Michael stood motionless, watching as Jimmy continued to bury himself with every word. Prima donna? Michael repeated, disbelief coloring his voice. Jimmy, you laid hands on me. You tried to sabotage my career. You set me up with lies, and I'm the prima donna? Do you even hear yourself right now? But Jimmy was past the point of reason. In his panic, he made the fatal error of pressing on. Ladies and gentlemen, this is why I usually avoid guests like this. They walk in thinking they're too important for normal questions, too big to face accountability. Well, Michael, this is my show, and on my show, no one's above being called out. The silence that followed was thick and punishing. Michael glanced around the studio, at the shocked crew, at the audience members shaking their heads in disbelief, at the cameras recording what would be remembered as the moment Jimmy destroyed himself on air. Guests like this? Michael repeated slowly, letting the phrase sting. Jimmy, what exactly do you mean by that? Because I'm beginning to think your issue isn't with what I said, but with who I am. Jimmy's face turned pale as the weight of his words hit him. That's not what I meant. I meant, like, difficult guests, demanding ones. No, Jimmy. That's exactly what you meant. And now everyone sees it. Michael's voice was steady, but it rang with undeniable authority. You know what's truly tragic? You had a chance to be better. You could have shown class, professionalism, basic decency. But instead, you chose to show everyone who you really are when the cameras are on. Jimmy was sweating visibly now, his collar soaked, hands shaking as he fumbled with his cue cards. Michael, I think you're overreacting. We're just talking here. A conversation? Michael's laugh was bitter. Jimmy, a conversation takes two people who respect each other. This is a desperate man lashing out at someone he finds threatening, and that someone refusing to be broken. The band members exchanged uneasy glances. The writers stared at the floor. Producers whispered frantically into their headsets. Everyone in the room knew they were witnessing a moment that would be remembered for years to come. What I believe happened here tonight, Michael said, his voice echoing throughout the studio, is that you saw me walking confident, successful, and respected. And it reminded you of everything you're not, and everything you'll never be. That's absurd, Jimmy stammered, though his voice lacked conviction. Is it because, from where I'm standing, you look like a man so insecure about his own insignificance that you're willing to ruin your reputation live on television just to drag someone else down to your level? Michael began moving toward the edge of the stage, but Jimmy's voice stopped him. You can't just leave, Michael. We still have 10 minutes left in the segment. Michael slowly turned around, his expression a mix of pity and disgust. Watch me. If you walk off this stage, you'll never work in this town again. Jimmy warned, his voice breaking with desperation. I have friends. I have connections. I can make sure. Stop. Michael's voice sliced through Jimmy's threats like a blade. Just stop. Do you realize what you're saying? You're threatening me because I refuse to let you verbally abuse me. You're actually threatening my career because I have the courage to keep my dignity. The audience fell completely silent. Some people covered their mouths, others stared in disbelief. The cameras kept rolling, capturing every moment of what would become one of late-night TV's most infamous moments. Jimmy, let me make something clear. I don't need you. I don't need your show, your approval, your platform, or your fake friendship. What I want is to work with people who understand that talent and success are not threats to be torn down but achievements to be celebrated. Jimmy opened his mouth to reply, but Michael raised a hand. I'm not done. You said I'd never work in this town again, Jimmy. This town thrives on talent, creativity, and the ability to connect with audiences. And you just proved on live television that you have none of those qualities. If anyone's career is at risk tonight, it's not mine. Michael stepped closer, lowering his voice to a whisper that carried more weight than a shout. You know the difference between us, Jimmy? When people remember tonight and talk about what happened here, they'll recall a man who showed grace under pressure, and a man who revealed himself as petty, desperate, and cruel. Which one do you think you are? Jimmy opened and closed his mouth like a fish gasping for air, unable to speak. You wanted to know about my personal life? Here's something personal. I was raised to treat people with respect, to lift others up instead of tearing them down, to be a man of integrity whether or not the cameras are rolling. My mother would be ashamed if I stayed here one more second pretending this behavior is acceptable. Michael straightened his jacket and looked directly into the main camera. To everyone watching at home, to my fans, and to anyone who has ever believed in me, thank you for your support. What you saw tonight was not entertainment, it was a cautionary tale about what happens when insecurity and power combine. He turned back to Jimmy, who sat slumped in his chair, defeated. Jimmy, I truly hope you find the help you need. This isn't who you have to be. You can be better than this, but you'll have to make that choice without me. Michael walked toward. He reached the edge of the stage but stopped at the steps leading down to the exit. Turning back one last time, his voice echoed clearly through the quiet studio. You know what's really sad about all this? I used to watch your show. I thought you were funny. I respected what you did. But tonight, you proved that the person I thought I knew was never real. With that, Michael B. Jordan walked off the stage, through the stunned crowd, and out of the studio, leaving behind a moment that would be remembered and dissected for years. Jimmy sat alone at his desk, the bright studio lights shining down on him. The cameras kept rolling, capturing every second of his humiliation. The audience started murmuring, then whispering, then openly discussing what had just happened. The silence seemed endless until Jimmy finally looked up at the camera, his expression defeated and confused. We'll be right back, he quietly said into the microphone, but everyone knew things would never be the same. The credits never played that night. Instead, the show cut to an unexpected commercial break that lasted until the local news began. Meanwhile, somewhere in Hollywood, Michael B. Jordan was driving home with his integrity intact, his reputation stronger, and his conscience clear. That night, one of Hollywood's biggest stars showed everyone what true strength really means. It was also the night a talk show host learned some boundaries can never be crossed back. That night marked a piece of television history, one powerful comeback at a time. What do you think Michael should have done differently? Should he have stayed to finish the interview? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more jaw-dropping stories from the entertainment world.